Shlubin turned toward Oleg and twitched his bushy eyebrows. His whole figure was disheveled. Oleg suddenly knew who he was. He was the Mad Miller from The Mermaid. Me? A miller? I'm no miller, I'm a raven. Okay, so here's the asterisk that I absolutely needed. This is a line from the classical Russian opera by Dargomazisky. The asterisk says, a line from the classical Russian opera by Dargomazisky. Okay? I don't remember anymore. Maybe I dreamed those children up. Maybe they never existed. Listen to me. Do you think a man can become like a log of wood? A log of wood doesn't mind whether it lies to itself or among other logs. The way I live, if I lose consciousness, fall down on the floor and die, no one will find me for days. Not even my neighbors. But listen, listen. He grabbed Oleg hard by the shoulder, as if he was frightened Oleg wouldn't hear him. I'm still on my guard. Just as I was before. I keep looking behind me. I know I spoke out in the ward, but I'd never dare say anything like that in Kokand, or where I work. As for what I'm telling you now, I'm only doing it because they are wheeling in a little table to take me to my operation. Even now, I'd never say it if there was a third person present. No, never. That's the way it is. This is the wall they've pushed me up against. I graduated from Agricultural Academy, then did advanced courses in historical and dialectical materialism. I was a university lecturer in several subjects, and in Moscow at that. But then the oak trees began to topple. There was the fall of Muratov at the Agricultural Academy. Professors were being arrested by the dozen. We were supposed to confess our mistakes. I confessed them. We were supposed to renounce them. I renounced them. A certain percentage managed to survive. Didn't they? Well, I was part of that percentage. I withdrew into the study of pure biology. I found myself a quiet haven. But then the purge started there as well. And what a purge. The professors' chairs in the biological department got a thorough sweeping with the broom. We were supposed to give up lecturing? Very well, I gave up lecturing. I withdrew even further, became an assistant. I agreed to become a little man. He was always so silent in the ward, and yet now he was speaking with extraordinary ease. Words poured out of him as though public speaking were his daily occupation. They were destroying textbooks written by great scientists. They were changing the curricula. Very well, I agreed to that too. We would use new books for teaching. They suggested we reshape anatomy, microbiology, and neuropathology to fit in with the doctrines of an ignorant agronomist and an expert in horticulture. Asterisk next to horticulture. By ignorant agronomist, he means Trofim Lysenko, the scientist who dominated Soviet biology until the fall of Khrushchev in 1964 and destroyed many of his opponents by denouncing them to the security police. The horticulturist is Ivan Mishurin, a specialist in growing new varieties of fruit trees whose name was misused by Lysenko. James Lindsay talks about this Lysenko guy. It's been a minute since I've familiarized myself with him, but there's a whole thing, Lysenkoism and all of this. I encourage you to look into it because it's pretty much a serious issue with postmodern thought. And he, from what I remember, has a lot to do with very bad things. So yeah, ignorant agronomist. Bravo, I agreed. I voted in favor. No, that's not enough. Will you please give up your assistantship as well? All right, I'm not arguing. I'll work on methods of biology, teaching it in schools. But no, the sacrifice wasn't accepted. I was sacked from that job as well. Very well, I agree. I'll be a librarian in remote Kokand. I retreated a long, long way. Still, I was alive and my children were university graduates. But then librarians receive secret instructions from the authorities for the destruction of books by this or that author. Well, this was nothing new for us. Had I not declared, a quarter of a century earlier from my chair of dialectical materialism, that the relativity theory was counter-revolutionary obscurantism? So I drew up a document, my party secretary and special branch representative signs it, and we stuff the books into the stove with all your genetics, leftist aesthetics, ethics, cybernetics, arithmetic. He could still laugh, the mad Raven. Why set up bonfires in the streets? Superfluous histrionics. Let's do it in some quiet corner. Let's shove the books into the stove. The stove will keep us warm. The stove's what I've been pushing up against. I've been pushed back against a stove. And yet, I managed to raise a family, and my daughter edits a provincial newspaper. She wrote a little lyrical poem. No, I don't wish to retreat. To ask pardon, I am unable. If we fight, then we fight. As for my father, under the table. His dressing gown hung up on him like a pair of helpless wings. Yes, I agree, was all Kostoglotov could say. Your life hasn't been any easier than mine. That's right, said Shlubin, catching his breath. He relaxed his posture and began to speak more calmly. I wonder what is the riddle of these changing periods of history. In no more than 10 years, a whole people loses its social drive and courageous impulse. Or rather, the impulse changes the sign from plus to minus. From bravery to cowardice. You know, I have been a Bolshevik since 1917. I remember how we charged in and dispersed the local council of Soviet revolutionaries and Mensheviks in Tambov, even though all the weapons we had were a couple of fingers to put in our mouths and whistle with. I fought in the Civil War. You know, we did nothing to protect our lives. We were happy to give them for the world revolution. What happened to us? How could we have given in? What was the chief thing that got us down? Fear? The idols of the marketplace? The idols of the theater? All right, I'm a little man. But what about Nadezhda Konstantinovna Krupskaya? Asterisk next to Nadezhda Konstantinovna Krupskaya. Lenin's widow. Okay. Didn't she understand? Didn't she realize what was happening? Why didn't she raise her voice? How much a single statement from her would have meant to all of us if it didn't cost her her life. Who knows what might have changed? Might have dug our heels in and stopped it from going any farther. Then what about Solzhenitsyn? Double asterisk next to that, an old Bolshevik in charge of industrialization in the Soviet Union during the 30s who committed suicide in 1937. The only reason I know how to spell or how to pronounce his name is because of reading or listening to an audiobook about Stalin. I was like, who's this fucking Solzhenitsyn? He was a real eagle of a man, wasn't he? They couldn't break him by locking him up in the Schlüsselburg fortress, or by sending him to hard labor in Siberia. What kept him from speaking up once, just once, against Stalin? But no, they preferred to die in mysterious circumstances, or to commit suicide. Is that courage? Will you tell me, please? How can I be the one to tell you, Alexei Filipovich? How can I? You explain it to me. Shlubin sighed and tried to change his position on the bench. But it hurt, no matter how he sat. There's something else that interests me. Here you are. You were born after the revolution, but they put you in prison. Well, have you lost your faith in socialism or haven't you? Kostoglotov smiled vaguely. I don't know. Things got so tough out there, you sometimes went further than you wanted to, out of sheer fury. Shlubin freed the hand he had been using to prop himself up with on the bench. With his hand now enfeebled by disease, he clung to Oleg's shoulder. Young man, he said, don't ever make this mistake. Don't ever blame socialism for the sufferings and the cruel years you've lived through. However you think about it, history has rejected capitalism once and for all. Well, out there in the camps, we used to argue that there was a lot of good in private enterprise. It makes life easier, you see. You can always get everything. You know where to find things. You know, that's a Philistine's way of reasoning. If it's true, the private enterprise is extremely flexible, but it's good only within very narrow limits. If private enterprise isn't held in an iron grip, it gives birth to people who are no better than beasts. Those stock exchange people with greedy appetites, completely beyond restraint. Capitalism was doomed ethically before it was doomed economically, a long time ago. Well, to be quite honest, replied Oleg, twitching his forehead, I've found people whose greedy appetites are beyond restraint in our society as well. And I don't mean state-licensed craftsmen or repairmen. Take Yemelyan Shashik, for example. That's true, said Shlubin, his hand weighing more and more heavily on Oleg's shoulder. But is socialism to blame? We made a very quick turnaround. We thought it was enough to change the mode of production, and people would immediately change with it. But did they? The hell they did. They didn't change a bit. Man is a biological type. It takes thousands of years to change him. Can there be socialism, then? And there indeed. It's an enigma, isn't it? They talk about democratic socialism, but that's just superficial. It doesn't get to the essence of socialism. It only refers to the form in which socialism is introduced, the structure of the state that applies it. It's merely a declaration that heads will not roll, but it doesn't say a word about what this socialism will be built on. Holy fuck. This is so incredible that this was written so long ago, because we are literally now hearing the words democratic socialism again and again by the Democrat left. And I don't even mean that as like a slander. They're literally saying it. That's what their party's built on. Let's continue. Can there indeed? It's an enigma, isn't it? They talk about democratic socialism, but that's just superficial. It doesn't get to the essence of socialism. It only refers to the form in which socialism is introduced, the structure of the state that applies it. It's merely a declaration that heads will not roll, but it doesn't say a word about what this socialism will be built on. You can't build socialism on an abundance of material goods because people sometimes behave like buffaloes. They stampede and trample the goods into the ground. Nor can you have socialism that's always drumming on about hatred because social life cannot be built on hatred. After a man has been burned with hatred year in, year out, he can't simply announce one fine day, "That's enough. As from today, I'm finished with hatred. From now on, I'm only going to love." No. If he's used to hating, he'll go on hating. He'll find someone closer to him whom he can hate. Do you know the poem by Herweg? Asterisk next to Herweg. George Herweg, 1817 to 1875, a German revolutionary poet, at one time a friend of Karl Marx. The lines quoted mean, "Until our hand turns to ashes, shall it let drop the sword? We have loved long enough. Now, finally, we wish to hate." So this is what this poem is about to say. Bis unsere Hand in Asche sterbt, soll se vam schwert nicht lassen. Oleg took up the lines. Wir haben lang genug gelebt und wollen endlich hassen. So it seems to me like one guy is saying part of this poem, the other one is finishing his sentence because he also knows the poem, because though there are two different sides of this forced socialism, and they both ended up in the cancer ward, they both know the same Karl Marx poem. How fitting is that? Of course I know it. We learned it at school. That's right. You learned it at school. That's what's so terrifying. They taught you the poem at school when they should have taught you the opposite. To hell with your hatred now, finally we wish to love. That's what socialism ought to be like. You mean Christian socialism, is that right? Asked Oleg, trying to guess. It's going too far to call it Christian. There are political parties that called themselves Christian socialists in societies that emerged from under Hitler and Mussolini. But I can't imagine with what kind of people they undertook to build this kind of socialism. At the end of the last century, Tolstoy decided to spread practical Christianity throughout society. But his ideals turned out to be impossible for his contemporaries to live with. His preaching had no link with reality. I should say that, for Russia in particular, with our repentances, confessions, and revolts, our Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, and Kropotkin, there's only one true socialism, and that's ethical socialism. That is something completely realistic. Kind of beg to differ on that one. Kostoglotov screwed up his eyes. But this ethical socialism, how should we envisage it? What would it be like? It's not very difficult to imagine, said Shlubin. His voice had become lively again, and he had lost his startled expression of the Miller Raven. It was a cheerful liveliness. Clearly, he was eager to persuade Kostoglotov. He spoke very distinctly, like a matter of giving a lesson. We have to show the world a society in which all relationships, fundamental principles, and laws flow directly from the ethics, and from them alone. Ethical demands must determine all considerations: how to bring up children, what to train them for, to what end the work of grown-ups should be directed, and how their leisure should be occupied. As for your scientific research, it should only be conducted where it doesn't damage morality. In the first instance, where it doesn't damage the researchers themselves. The same should apply to foreign policy. Whenever the question of frontiers arises, we should think not of how much richer or stronger this or that course of action will make us, or how it will raise our prestige. We should consider one criterion only: how far is it ethical? Yes, but that's hardly possible, is it? Not for another 200 years, Kostoglotov frowned. But wait a moment. I'm not with you on one point. Where is the material basis for your scheme? There has to be an economy, after all, doesn't there? That comes before everything else. Does it? That depends. For example, Vladimir Solovyev argues rather convincingly that an economy could and should be built on an ethical basis. There's a asterisk next to Vladimir Solovyev, a Russian religious thinker, 1853 to 1900, whose ideas are an important influence on modern Russian non-Marxist thought. Does it? That depends. For example, Vladimir Solovyev argues rather convincingly that an economy could and should be built on an ethical basis. What's that? Ethics first and economics afterwards? Kostoglotov looked bewildered. Exactly. Listen, you're a Russian, but I bet you haven't read a single line of Vladimir Solovyev, have you? Kostoglotov twisted his lips to indicate no. Well, you've at least heard of his name. Yes, when I was inside. But at least you've read a page or two of Kropotkin, have you? His Mutual Aid Among Men? Kostoglotov made the same movement with his lips. Yes, of course. His views are incorrect, so why read him? What about Mikhailovsky? Asterisk next to Mikhailovsky, a leading ideologist of populist socialism, 1840 to 1904. No, of course you haven't. He was refuted, wasn't he? Banned and withdrawn from the libraries. When could I have read them? What books could I have read? Asked Kostoglotov indignantly. All of my life I've sweated blood, and still people keep asking me, have you read this? Have you read that? When I was in the army, the shovel was never out of my hand. It was the same in the camps, and now I'm in exile. It's exactly the same, only now it's a hoe. When have I had time to read? But Shlubin's face, with his round eyes and furry eyebrows, shone with the excitement of an animal about to overtake its quarry. So you see, he said, That's what ethical socialism is. One should never direct people toward happiness, because happiness too is an idol of the marketplace. One should direct them toward mutual affection. A beast gnawing at its prey can be happy too, but only human beings can feel affection for each other. And this is the highest achievement they can aspire to. Oh no, I want happiness. You'd better leave me with happiness, Oleg insisted vigorously. Just give me happiness for the few months I have before I die. Otherwise, to hell with the whole. Happiness is a mirage. Shlubin was emphatic, straining his strength to the utmost. He had turned quite pale. I was happy bringing up my children, but they spat on my soul. To preserve this happiness, I took books, which were full of truth, and burned them in the stove. As for the so-called happiness of future generations, it's even more of a mirage. Who knows anything about it? Who knows what idols they will worship? Ideas of what happiness is have changed too much through the ages. No one should have the effrontery to try to plan in advance. When we have enough loaves of white bread to crush them under our heels, when we have enough milk to choke us, we still won't be in the least happy. But if we share things we don't have enough of, if we care only about happiness and about reproducing our species, we shall merely crowd the earth senselessly and create a terrifying society. You know, I don't feel very well. I'd better go lie down. All this time, Shlubin's face had looked exhausted. Oleg hadn't noticed how pale, how deathly it had become. Come on then, Alexei Filipovich. Come on, I'll take your arm. It wasn't easy for Shlubin to get up from the position he was in. They dragged themselves along very slowly. All around them was the lightness of spring, but gravity weighed heavily on both men. Their bones, the flesh that remained to them, their clothes, their shoes, even the stream of sunlight pressed upon them heavily and burdened them. They walked in silence. They were tired of talking. Only when they had reached the porch steps and were standing in the shadow of the cancer wing did Shlubin speak again. Still leaning on Oleg, he lifted his head to look up at the poplar trees and the patch of merry sky. He said, "The only thing is, I don't want to die under the knife. I'm frightened. No matter how long you live, or what a dog's life it's been, you still want to live." They walked into the lobby. It was hot and stuffy. Very slowly, one step after the other, they began to climb the long staircase. Then Oleg asked him, "Tell me, did you think of this during those 25 years, while you were bowing low and renouncing your beliefs?" Shlubin replied, his voice empty and flat, growing weaker and weaker. "Yes, I did. I renounced everything, and I went on thinking. I stuffed the old books into the stove, and I turned things over in my mind. Why not? Haven't I earned the right to a few thoughts? Through my suffering? Through my betrayal?" And that's the end of chapter 31. Sorry it took me 3 weeks to fucking read this chapter. Wow, that was one of the best chapters yet. I know I keep saying that, but damn. So Shlubin and Oleg, aka Solzhenitsyn's character in this book, take a walk and get to know each other, and they're both obviously very separate in their ideas, but yeah. Anyway, I'm just going to stop talking because the gate is now freaking out again, and I've got to treat this new studio. But I wanted to get back to y'all as soon as I possibly could. We'll read chapter 32 next time. Chapter 32 is called The Other Side of the Coin. Appreciate y'all for coming. If you like this and you want to hear more, leave your suggestions for me, and I will take a look, because we're going to need a new book to read soon. This is the Carter Banks Hour. I'm Carter Banks, narrating to you Cancer Ward live in audiobook format. Subscribe if you like it and want to hear more. Thanks, and stay safe. Peace.